So I'm basically now CEO of this company called Paveway, and Paveway is a subsidiary of PSO.
What brought you towards IT and tech?
I went as an economics major, but I got really interested in computer science.
You were the person who actually started building that from scratch over here. How was that experience? How did that come about?
A few months I was focused on building Daraz as co-founder. Pakistani online shopping kaun karta hai? So sometimes the lack of quality supply can be misconstrued as a lack of demand.
How easy or how difficult was that to get that tech system put in place?
Traditional models, the way they operate in the West may not necessarily work in Pakistan or other emerging markets, right? I was the first person he hired when he joined. So on day one, we walked in, there was an office with no furniture. That was my first ever experience. I feel like I'm very comfortable with starting with nothing. We look for people with the right mindset, bring them on and give them the right material and the right training to make sure they can learn on the job really fast.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us once again. You are watching Pluggedin with Comstar. This is our third episode, and just a quick recap before we launch into this conversation. In our first episode, we spoke about the IT sector in Pakistan in its infancy in the 90s and where we stand today in 2025. In the second episode, we dive a little bit deeper. We spoke about Fintech and Agri-Tech and everything around that space. In our third episode, we have a very interesting guest, and it only makes sense that since we've covered all those aspects, we take the conversation even more forward and we speak to someone who's actually been a part of not just the founding team, but actually who's built systems from scratch, which we are seeing today as successful businesses across the IT, the tech, and the internet sectors in Pakistan. So a lot to learn on today's episode about these companies and the man who's been behind them in launching these different ventures and how they're still standing. And it's sustainable as well. Let's get straight into the conversation. We have with us Farees Shah. Farees, assalamu alaikum. How are you? And thank you for joining us on Plugged In with Comstar. How are you?
I'm very well. Welcome and thank you for having me on.
Absolute pleasure, Farees. So, Farees, before we, as I mentioned in my intro, you are someone who's not just part of this industry, but has been in this industry as a player who has actually built ecosystems, built systems and companies which are even now working very successfully, mashallah say. And you've been here now almost 16 years. As I know, I think it was 2011 or 10 when you had come back from your master's after doing your MBA. So my first question before we get into these companies and how all that happened, what brought you towards IT and tech?
Look, I think my focus personally is, more is on problem solving, right? So I think if I go way back while I was in my undergrad at LUMS, I went as an economics major, but I got really interested in computer science. And a lot of this has made sense in hindsight, but I think I really got interested initially, but eventually didn't find the subject very interesting. So what happened was initially computer science is a lot about problem solving. You have to come with algorithms to solve problems, which I really enjoyed. Maybe not so much actually building of like products later on. So I realized then that what actually motivated me was problem solving. And I think what's happened is technology has of course evolved so much in the last decade or so that it's become an enabler to solve all kinds of problems that exist in our world, especially in developing markets like where we are. Yeah. So I feel like that's what probably motivates me more than technology per se. It's solving problems, and there's no better way to do it than technology. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's been tech each time.
Yeah.
And the best part is Farees has, like you mentioned about problem solving, it's been about e-commerce, it's about selling cars, and now in Fintech as well, building a system over there as well. So let's start with e-commerce. And the time was, I think, about 2011-12. Let's talk about Daraz. And you were the person who actually started building that from scratch over here. How was that experience? How did that come about?
Yeah, so look, I think that was probably, we built a startup well before it was cool to do a startup in Pakistan.
Yes.
And I think at that time, I was actually spending some time in Dubai, and I met this company called Rocket Internet, who had a business idea in mind, and they had funding, but they were keen to go to Bangladesh first. So I met them and I convinced them to come to Pakistan first. This is 2011, where Pakistan was still considered as security-wise a problematic country, if I can use that word. So anyways, I think, long story short, I convinced them to come to Pakistan first. That's when we rolled out, a number of different businesses which they were looking to roll out. So I was the first guy on the ground, everything from setting up the legal entities to so on and so forth. But within a few months, I was focused on building Daraz as co-founder. I had another guy, Munib, who joined me as co-founder, and the two of us built it for the first 5 years or so. And it was interesting because I think more than anything else, we would go out to people and tell them, for example, we were initially an online fashion player, right? So we would go to fashion brands and tell them that, hey, we're doing this. And they'd be like, gee, Pakistan में online shopping कौन करता है, right? That would be the norm.
That's exactly what we want to hear. Back in 2011.
Yeah, and it was like Pakistan में online shopping का रिवाज ही नहीं है, and I would give the people the example then. So at that point, the cinema industry had just suddenly come alive. So I would give them the example that until 2 years ago, nobody said cinemas do well, but cinemas are doing well now. So sometimes the lack of quality supply can be misconstrued as a lack of demand. And I think until you put it out there, you can't really say. Maybe I said maybe you're right, maybe there isn't, but you can't say that for sure until there's actually someone who's trying to do that. So anyway, it took a lot of convincing to the larger fashion brands, I would say, to come on board. But I think a lot of this, there were one or two who perhaps were the kind who were, always trying to try new things and so on. So they were on board, and I think obviously
How did you offer them? What did you convince them that this was the place to be? And as you mentioned, Daraz started off as a fashion platform, and that was it. Because now Daraz is still there in Pakistan. We're sitting in 2025. They're selling everything almost.
Yeah. So I think, so 4 years in, we transitioned from what we call a fashion business to an Amazon business of selling everything.
Yeah.
But I think at that time, the idea was this was an added angle of sale. I think a lot of them actually came in for the marketing and stuck around for the sales, if that makes any sense. So I think a lot of them wanted to be on a platform which is considered forward and tech savvy, and we talk about how much marketing we would do and how many visits we would get, which was, I think, within 6 months, and we actually had a pretty high number of visits to the website. So I think a lot of them came in for the publicity, and then they hung around because they actually were managing to sell a lot of their stuff. So I think a lot of the successful ones we did, I'd say, they would look at us as one of their stores. So if they say they have 25 stores in Pakistan, Daraz could be one of their stores, and then that's how they would treat us, and that's what would work really well at that time. Yeah.
Nice. So that was online selling, retail, went on online.
Yeah.
From there, you go on to streaming service.
Yeah.
That too in Pakistan. How did that come about?
Well, I think, I spent 3 years as co-founder at Daraz and built that business, right? An opportunity came along and to build an online streaming business, right? So the idea was I could have spent a few more years, but the hard part had already been done. The company had been set up. We were doing about, I think, €1 million a monthly turnover at that time. And I think that's where the opportunity came in the content space. So I think I've seen this journey evolve, right? So when we went to the local content players 4 years later, or when I went saying, hey, why don't you put your content online? I didn't see the same pushback, who's going to watch it, right? Because by then there was an acceptance, and the acceptance that, okay, there is a demand for this. So I think so. Again, that was a super interesting journey as well. I think lots of parallels, right? If you see a lot of the stuff which I've built, it's essentially been building businesses which are solving problems and finding gaps in the market. But technology is what we use to actually solve them, right? So technology becomes the enabler to solve a bigger problem that exists in the market, yeah.
So we're talking about internet and these services, but of course the tech behind that. How easy or how difficult was that to get that tech system put in place here in Pakistan? With the policies changing, we know how the government is as well. So tell us a bit about that.
Look, I think, if I'm honest, I think in 2011, the tech we had wasn't revolutionary, right? It was tech which, perhaps if you're willing to find the right partner and build, you can probably get it with off-the-shelf solution and so on and so forth. But I think the tech had to be good enough. But at that point, the market was so in the nascent stage that it didn't have to be the most revolutionary tech. You just had tech which is good enough to do the job and could scale, and that's what we had. So I think iFix is a bit more complicated because then online streaming requires slightly more technology, more advanced stuff for online streaming than it does for. But I think we had good global partners as well as local partners. We worked closely with the telcos at that time, who were very advanced by then, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so tell me more about again the streaming platform. What was, like you mentioned, the players were more eager or more easier to get in, and they wanted to put their content out there. But now still we see, sitting in 2025, most of the big media houses in Pakistan are putting up their content on YouTube. There's still not one platform where everyone's putting their things in. Why is that? And did this thing actually take off, or because we haven't heard much of it since then?
I think as far as iFix is concerned, it was actually bought out by a Chinese company. So it's still it was rebranded, it still works in the market, but they're focused on other markets. Having said that, I think there's still a massive opportunity in the online streaming space in Pakistan.
Yeah.
I think but what also really important to understand is that traditional models, the way they operate in the West, may not necessarily work in Pakistan or other emerging markets, right? So initially, iFix came in and they had like a Netflix model. You pay extra rupees a month. At that time, it should be 300 rupees a month.
Mm-hmm.
The average Pakistani at that time was spending less than 300 rupees on his mobile connection, right? So the idea is you package things differently. You sell them daily and monthly, week packages rather than monthly packages. So I think it's a lot about somebody coming in with a longer term horizon. I think there's definitely room to build a business in that space here. But I think someone needs to have an investor with a 4 to 5 to 7 year horizon rather than a 2-year horizon for that to actually scale here.
But you mentioned that there's still a lot of space in the online streaming platforms in Pakistan.
Sure.
Okay, because now we do have some other platforms. There's Myco, there's Tapmat who are providing these services. So you think that's there?
I mean, I think from what I understand, I don't think they're filling the same gap because they focus more on live content.
Yeah.
So they're focused on restreaming television channels, or I know they have on-demand content as well, but I think a bulk of the viewership is actually coming from stuff like live cricket or stuff like that. I hear right now. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then there was a startup which was selling cars.
Yes. So I think online cars again. I think like I said, what happens is when you are building a business and when you're looking to solve problems and fill gaps, very often in developing markets, you are building businesses which are solved by the state, perhaps in other countries, right? But in a developing market, sometimes state is not solving that for you. So that's where there's an opportunity for people in the private sector to not just build a business, but also build the ecosystem around that. So if I go back to the Daraz example, on day one, when you were setting up, we had a meeting with I won't name the company, but what is now known as, it was always been one of the largest courier companies in the world. When you met them on day one, they said, "Gee, we don't do cash on delivery. Uska to Pakistan mein demand hi nahi hai."
And this is 2011.
2011,
No
right?
COD.
So they said COD to hum nahi karte. It's not for we do it for maybe corporate clients, etc. Right? So we then found another company called BlueX who we worked with, and had they not been around, we may not have been able to launch for a couple of years. So I think we worked with them on building stuff. There was a smaller logistics company. They were able to do this for us. At the same time, we also built our own rider network because, there was, not, like I said, when the ecosystem does not exist, you need to build it sometimes to exist yourself. Yeah.
Tell us more about building these systems. How was that? How much of a challenge was that? What hurdles came about and how did you guys overcome all of that?
Look, I think the way this works is if I take a step back, right, I think the first role I ever did in my life, I used to work with a company called the Pakistan Mercantile Exchange. And at that time, when the MD hired me, I was the first person he hired when he joined. So on day one, we walked in, there was an office with no furniture, right? And that's how we started. So
there's a constant here with everything that you've done. You've been like the first.
Why I mentioned this, because I think because if that was my first ever experience, I feel like I'm very comfortable with starting with nothing. Right, but what did I spend my first 3 months doing in that job? The MD would basically make me research on how other companies in the same sector globally work and how they're doing things, and based on that, design our process. So since then, that's literally how I spent the first 90 days in everything I'm doing. So to answer your question, how did we do Daraz? We basically researched our group companies doing this in 15 other countries and figured out what would work here, what would not work here. Right. So when you are bringing any international business to Pakistan, right, it becomes a matter of two things. There's obviously some kind of global know-how saying, okay, this is how the industry operates. And then you look at, okay, the company knows the industry, you should know the market and decide what will work here or what needs to be adapted or what will work as is. And that is the number one thing which I think you need, right? That sense of, okay, A, what will work here, B, what will not work here, and B, what can work but needs to be adapted. And I think if you get that balance right, then you'll probably succeed in launching an international business.
But there's one thing I'm catching from what you're saying is that the investors have put their money into something, but how much time do they give actually for things to turn around and start becoming profitable? And is that a challenge as well?
I think it depends, right? So, for example, investors typically, these investors don't necessarily look for a profit. They're looking to put their money in and then eventually sell to somebody. I think it's more about capital gain because most of these companies don't necessarily turn profitable, but their valuation goes up. So, as an investor, if I'm putting in, let's say, $1 million and I can sell my stake for $3 million in 2 years. So I've made my money, right? That's how it operates. But it's not. But I think it depends. I think a lot of them do have the appetite long enough, of course.
Yeah. And how many of the projects that you've been involved in, the valuations you've seen go up yourself, and people who are backing this have actually done well by putting their stakes into it?
Look, I think a lot of them have. I would say because I think the way this works is a lot of these are private limited companies, so the numbers are of course not publicly disclosed, right? But I think if I use the Daraz example. Rocket Internet, the parent behind Daraz, they set up 7 ventures in the first year and a half in Pakistan. 5 of them shut down in the first 12 months. The other 2 are Daraz and Food Panda, right? So, on those 2 alone, they probably more than recovered they don't have a stake in either company anymore.
Okay.
But they more than recovered whatever investment they made across the 7 companies. That's how the model works, right? When you're investing in startups, typically, I think getting 2 successes out of 7 is actually a very high number because typically it's smaller than that. But those two have gone on to become household names in Pakistan right now.
Yeah, and they've done very well in terms of marketing the product as well. And I think it's synonymous with even like my 6-year-old now knows exactly both these companies.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's that. So Farees, now moving on to, again, now you're in Fintech and starting up something over there with actually a state backed company.
Yes.
Tell a bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm basically now CEO of this company called Paveway. And Paveway is a subsidiary of PSO, Pakistan State Oil.
Yeah.
So PSO, as people probably aware, it represents a big chunk of Pakistan's GDP. We have 3,500 locations sitting across Pakistan. 95% of the population has a PSO pump within a 10-minute drive.
Yeah.
And then what we also have is we have a lot of our business happens on cash. So like we have the smallest outlay sitting on 1 crore of cash, which they need to deposit at a PSO bank account every single day. So the idea was how do we utilize that to make it better? So what we've done is we're launching an EMI business. We have a license from State Bank. We're in a pilot stage right now. And we're launching a payment product called Payway, right? So this basically enables you, like a lot of other wallets, it's essentially everything a bank can do, but we can do everything, but we can't lend money at the moment. So you can open a mobile wallet, you can use it to transfer money, receive money, pay your bills, etc. But every single PSO location becomes a place for you to transact. So you can walk up to any PSO location instead of going to the bank and withdraw your cash, deposit cash, do any transactions, right? So the idea is to increase financial inclusion all across the country. And, suddenly the reach we have is, again,
Massive across the country. Yeah.
We have 3 million people coming into a PSO location every single day, which is probably more than most online platforms in Pakistan.
So you already have a very good competitive advantage here.
What we have is a captive user base. So how well, of course, we capitalize on that is something which is going to play out now. But yes.
So are you are you the first in setting this up as well, or you?
Well, I think this is a subsidiary of PSO. So I think there was some background work being done in PSO to apply for the in principle approval from the State Bank. But once the approval came, then I was the first person hired for this company as well as CEO. That's right.
Nice. And how's the build-up phase going now?
I think it's a financial institution. We work with the State Bank, so I think it's not a Daraz situation where in 3 months you have an up and running business, but I think because there's a regulatory hurdles you need to go through. Having said that, I think it's going well so far. I think it's early stage. I think we already at pilot launch. We'll have looking for a commercial launch some point in the next year, and then inshallah go big. Yeah.
Nice. Now as we come towards wrapping our podcast, but tell me more about in terms of finding the right HR in Pakistan, getting the right tech people to join these ventures as well. How's that? How are our students or people coming into this? Sorry about that. Coming into this in this sector.
Look, I think
you find the right HR. Are they well equipped, well trained?
I think it's a very good question. I think in Daraz in my early days, I remember we were looking to somebody as a buyer for fashion, right? And we met somebody who flew in from Lahore for the interview, and we met the guy, and he had everything the JD had asked for. But we decided not to hire him because at that point I realized that the most important thing we need to hire is mindset, right? So you can have all the right experience, but if you come in saying that, hey, you know what, this is how we do this, then that's not who we want. We need somebody who this is how I think we do this, but let's figure out what the best way for this company, right? Because at the end of the day, everything we're building, we know what problem is solving, but the exact solution we're going to work out as we go along. We're going to learn, make mistakes, and move on. And we need somebody who can get the hands dirty, be willing to learn on the job and evolve, as opposed to come with a very set idea. So I think the most important thing for me, like again, in all these ventures I've done, I'm essentially very often building something that's not been done before. So a lot of the roles I'm hiring for, it's not like hiring for, say, in some sectors where when you go hire, these are the 10 other companies doing the exact same thing. Hire the exact same guy doing the same job. Very often that does not exist for us. So we look for people with the right mindset, bring them on and give them the right material and the right training to make sure they can learn on the job really fast. So I feel like for me, mindset trumps experience, education, everything.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Nice. All the young people watching us right now and watching Farice, that's a very good skill to have. Well, yeah. I guess soft skill.
Yeah.
Keeping yourself open to learning new things and contributing in many ways. And initially in our conversation, you mentioned that now it's a cool thing to be a founder or having a startup in Pakistan. How do you see that space right now in the country? Do you think we are where we should be? Or we are ahead of the rest of the region? How do you see that?
Look, I think there's lots of things that have happened over the last 3-4 years. So I think globally speaking, there's been a liquidity crunch for lots of reasons. So the money available for startups is not as much as they used to be. Secondly, I think there's been a bit of uncertainty in Pakistan from an economic standpoint. So I think that also has not helped. So there is definitely less money around investing in startups. So I think it's a lot more about building a business which can be, I mean, the model has changed. So until 7 years ago, it was about, hey, raising money, building a business really fast, but increase your valuation, but you continue to burn money. Now, I think people are not really, in Pakistan, especially the appetite to bankroll a company that may be very valuable, but it's not making money in the short term is not there so much. So I think it's much more about building a business that's sustainable and that can go to profitability really fast, I think. So I think because of which we probably are missing out on some potential, I'd say, opportunities in the market, but that's just the market, where the market is
That's
right.
the way it is right now. Perfect. Well, Farees, thank you so much for making time for us. We really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure the viewers right now and whoever's watched this podcast learned from a lot from your experience as well. I certainly have. And wishing you the very best with this current venture of yours.
Thank you.
And how many years do you see yourself there and till the next one?
Well, look, I think that generally, very often when I joined this venture, so I met a bunch of people who were working on this from before, and I mentioned how long they had been in the company for, like in the parent company, and they all mentioned 7 years, 8 years, and 10 years. And I mentioned I've never worked anywhere for more than 5 years. And so I think the thing is, but I think it's also important to understand that 5 years in a startup where you're building from zero is perhaps from the journey point of view is much, I won't always say much more impactful, but it's much more, you're going through many more stages of business than you would in a normal company in like even 10 years perhaps, right?
Yeah.
Because this is how the company evolves. So in the case of Daraz, I joined, I was the first person. When I left, there were 400 people and there was, I don't know, like 100 million euros a monthly turnover, right? So I think it's a journey in itself. So again, I don't really have a timeline per se, but I think obviously I want to keep building for as long as I can add value and make sure we at a growth stage. Yeah,
absolutely. So good luck for that. And once again, thank you for being with us. And that was our third episode. Hope all of you enjoyed our conversation with Farees. We spoke a lot about his experience in not just founding, but building from scratch, building companies and scaling them, and wishing him the best. And hope you guys had a good time as well. Hope to see you in our fourth podcast very soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.